Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the University of Iowa Center for Human Rights webinar entitled Racial Equity and Human Rights, Understanding White Privilege. I am Adrienne Wing, Director of UICHR. I am also the Associate Dean of International and Comparative Law Programs at the University of Iowa College of Law. I have been a member of the faculty for 33 years. For 20 years, UICHR has stood for a commitment to human rights, both in the United States as well as abroad. We are part of the College of Law, but are involved with the entire UI campus and the broader community as well. Today's event will be our third addressing the theme Racial Equity and Human Rights. The first in the series was on activism, healing, and dialogue. The second was on the rights of protesters. You can find these prior webinars as well as today's on our website, which is uichr.org. On our website, you will also find resources for each of the topics. For today, look at the resource that is entitled Dr. Moore's 21-Day Challenge on Racial Equity. By the way, on our website, you will find a donate button. We welcome your support for our efforts by making a tax-deductible contribution to our cause. Next week, on Wednesday, June 24th at noon, we will have a webinar on racial equity and human rights, historical perspectives on anti-Black violence and visions for the future. The speakers next week will be Professors Simon Balto and Ashley Howard. Dr. Balto is the author of Occupied Territory, Policing Black Chicago. During the week of June 29th, we will have a session for our regular speaker series on the momentous US Supreme Court decision handed down on Monday, stating that US civil rights law protect LGBTQ workers. We anticipate further programming in our regular series as well as this racial equity series. And we also will be going back to our series COVID and Human Rights, which began this spring as well. The format for today is that I will interview Dr. Eddie Moore with a series of questions before we open up to audience questions. I'm very pleased to have him with me today, as I have known him since he was a doctoral student at the University of Iowa College of Education back in the 1990s. So welcome, Dr. Moore. For my first question, can you tell us about yourself, your background, and the positions that you hold now?
Hey, Professor Wing, good to see you again. Eddie Moore Jr., I'm so happy to be here. I'd like to start by saying I'm from a town in Florida called Punta Gorda. I just got to announce that just because I'm just so happy to be able to represent my community as the starting place of where I got my start. My high school basketball coach was from Iowa, actually, and he went to Cornell College, and that's how I got to Iowa. I did my undergrad at Cornell. I went back home. I was trying to do some discovering of what I wanted to do. I was growing up, and ended up back in Iowa at Loras College in Dubuque. And then I went on from there to the University of Iowa. After my coursework, I started at Cornell College as Director of Diversity. And it was there I started one of my jobs, which I'm still doing that I'm most known for, is the founder and program director of the White Privilege Conference. In addition to run the conference, I also am the founder and president of the Privilege Institute, which is now the nonprofit that the conference sits under. And thirdly, I'm also a public speaker. So I have my own public speaking organization called America and More, and I've been doing that since 1996. Before I pass it back to you, I will say, again, I did all my education in Iowa, and I owe a great deal of my success, not only the University of Iowa, the state of Iowa, and many of the great people that I've encountered along the journey. And so I'm happy to be here and especially happy to be here in collaboration with the University of Iowa, which really helped me with the things that I'm doing a lot today, like publications, as well as some presentations with other universities.
Thank you very much, Dr. Moore. That's a very good opening. And of course, I have to give a shout out to the white privilege conferences. I think I hold the record that I've been to 19 of the 20 conferences that have been held. Of course, this year it had to be postponed till next year, but they're quite fabulous, and it's wonderful you're known all over the world for these conferences. So here's my first main question, the big question that everybody wants to know. What is white privilege, and how does it relate to the concept of white supremacy?
Yeah, and it's really important that we don't use those words synonymously. White, simply put, is a perk, a benefit. There's no conscience in the definition. You get simply because you're white that you didn't ask for. And a lot of times those come in perks and benefits. So white privilege is simple, a perk, a benefit, something you get simply because you're white. Now, white supremacy is a mindset, a philosophy. It's the way that people operate, the way they design their organizations, their schools, their businesses, their teams, their corporations. And in that mindset, they believe that white is better. White is supreme. So white supremacy is really what it says. It's a belief that white is better. White is supreme. So when you design something with that philosophy, with that foundation, what comes from that are benefits simply because you're white. And so the way those things connect, I consider white supremacy the umbrella. It's where it ends from. And so depending on what you're talking about, and is white privilege, it's important to understand the philosophical, the mindset behind its design, its creation, and then the perks, the benefits, almost like the raindrops that sprinkle from the cloud is white privilege. That's the toughest thing. It's not the definition. People can agree with, disagree with that, but the definition is understand how it drips down, how it rains, how it impacts your life. That's where the real learning and teaching and understanding comes in. Because you and I, of course, because of how we look, we don't receive white privilege, although because your skin is lighter, whiter sense, there can be some sprinkle because it has some close association with white, if that makes sense. Now, saying that to a ninth grader or even a first year college student may seem so complicated because the dynamics of how white supremacy and white privilege play out in your lives, that's where I spent my career, my study, my understanding. So I can help a baseball coach. I can help a mom, a school teacher. All of those dynamics in the way white supremacy and white privilege play out are very different. And I've spent my career understanding those. And that's where the real work and the understanding lies, I think, over the next 25 years.
Great, great opening. What is the relationship between white privilege and implicit bias?
Yeah. So people know bias used to be something that people didn't know about. I mean, people were walking around saying, I'm colorblind. When I look at you, I don't see color. I treat all my kids, all my employees, so on and so forth, the same. And what bias has helped us to understand from brain research is we all have an implicit bias is really that buildup, that over and over again of bias plays out in the sea of our behavior. Like it's almost automatic. When you look at me, you see I'm tall, you see I'm a dude, you see I'm black, you may associate me with being an athlete. Now, even though I've had some of that in my background, that's not who I am to the core. But the implicit bias because of the over and over and over that we sometimes get society associate that and plays out in that way. Now, where that intersects with white supremacy, white privilege is, again, people may, because of the structural designs of organization, always presenting white and male better, as supreme, as richer, as smarter, as more employed, right? You get that message over and over and over again. Therefore, when you see white dude, you don't associate all of that with danger. Or it's often the boss, supervisor, banker, lawyer. So those are that implicit bias in white privilege, or privilege in general, I think we can say comprehensively, but in this case, white privilege play out. And we can look at that across white women versus black women. We can look at that from white boys in school versus black boys in school, white girls. So again, the definition, bias, everybody has it. It plays out in all our life. Privilege, perks you get, the rain that comes from the big cloud of white supremacy. But what that looks like in a school, a bank, a university, that's where study, that's where expertise. That's why when you're dealing with these complicated topics, if you haven't put in the time, you gotta have somebody involved in your organization that has. We often, sometimes people making claims about folks and their behavior and what's happening around them, being assigned white supremacy or white supremacist or even racist, and people not having clarity about the terms. That's why Malcolm Gladwell said it best in Outlier. If you're gonna be a pro in anything you do, you gotta put in 10,000 hours. And I think when it comes to doing this, having conversations and teaching and learning, you gotta have some expertise. And that's how I've spent my career. And I'm hoping inspiring somebody else, some others, to not only know these definitions, but understand how they play out. Because bias, white supremacy, white privilege, very different, although they do have some interrelated behaviors and intersections in the day-to-day of our lives.
Okay, here's a question that comes up a lot. If someone is poor, a white poor person, or a white middle-class person as opposed to a white multimillionaire or billionaire, how can that poor or middle-class white person have white privilege? Wouldn't a black doctor or lawyer have more privilege than this poor white or middle-class person?
Yeah, great question, great question. And this is where even more of the complexity plays out, because yes, that you and myself as Black professionals can have more privilege than a homeless white person that's not receiving any jobs or any access to healthcare or wellness or possibilities of opportunity. And so the real importance about privilege and the way we talk about it at the White Privilege Conference and the Privilege Institute is everybody has it. It just manifests itself in very different ways. In that case, there may be some class privilege differences. So the privilege that we're talking about here may have some intersections across race, Black, white, as professionals, and a Black homeless or poor person, middle-class person, white person, poor person, middle-class person. There's some race intersections there, but because we're talking about class, I mean, we know that often here in America, especially, the more resources you have, the more revenue you have, the more income you have, the more access you have. So I think the thing that I try to do is not make this a pitting war between one group and one person and the other. That's not what I'm trying to do. Having and talking about understanding white privilege, it's not about demeaning white people or making white people feel bad or trying to say a Black doctor is better than a poor white. No, I'm trying to people to really understand that this nation was designed in a narrow way around white supremacy. And for hundreds of years, it put forth policies and organizations and corporations operating in this narrow framework. And now today, as we try to form the more perfect union, we try to create this multicultural, inclusive society, that you can't make a society that's inclusive if you don't understand the narrow way in which it was designed. And so that question I welcome, and I hope people have more and more conversations, but I don't want it to be a conversation between, oh, well, I'm poor and white, I don't have privilege, which is, it's just not true. And me saying, or someone saying, well, you have a job, you're a doctor, so you have more privilege than I do. Who are you to be talking about this? I mean, those are not the kind of conversations I'm interested in. I want to work with people, and I'm hoping this is helping people to understand that if we're going to build an inclusive, more perfect union, that we got to understand the exclusive way that this imperfect union was formed. In white supremacy, white male cultural dominance was a big part of that.
Okay, how does the concept of white privilege address issues of intersectionality, which is a very popular term? How do those things interrelate to each other, or how can they?
Yeah, and that's where I'm thankful for the University of Iowa and some of the phenomenal professors there in the education department, as well as in the law school, that's helped me and brought into my early learning around understanding white supremacy, this term of intersectionality. So I've always built our foundation around that term. And that's where I mean, you can't say intersectionality where I'm from in Punta Gorda. You know what I'm saying? Folks ain't gonna be rolling with that terminology. So what I say is everybody's got privilege. All right, no one's outside of that. And intersectionality, I think, is about everybody having privilege. And when you look at privilege, it can't just be about white privilege. It can't just be about race. It can't be just about gender. That there are many ways that we all possess not only one or two, but many levels of privilege as well. And I think that's where intersectionality comes in and really makes it an important and challenging topic that requires some expertise and study. And I'm still learning, but I will end by saying intersectionality, when I talk about privilege, is always a big part of that. Race, religion, class, gender identity, body size, job, access, language, all of that has to be a part of the understanding.
All right. If recognizing white privilege is the first step, what is the next step? There are some people that suggest the second step is, for white people, actively using the privilege to disrupt racism, while other people say, no, the next step for white people should be relinquishing the privilege. Which should it be, and can you give any examples?
Yeah. Well, I'm depending on where the person is in their life and their access, I think both of those can be true. So, for example, we saw in Minneapolis a police chief that was white step aside and let the person of color, the second in command, come forward. Now that would be an example of someone having some privilege, having some power, and stepping back and letting someone else come forward. Now, we can agree and disagree with it, but that would be a clear example of someone using their privilege to advance someone else. Again, my belief is, and what I advise young people to do is, if you have access to privilege, the key is not feeling bad about that. The question is, what are you doing with that? What good things that you can do with that? And so that's what I say to folks. I think that, again, me across gender or me across ability, I'm trying to always use that high level of privilege that I possess in those areas to do good things in the places that I have power and I have access. So I think you can do both. And it's really a matter of your understanding of privilege. The key is It's not about guilting people, shaming people. That's the key. What I worry about when people talk about privilege, white privilege, particularly the white people, it's about beating them up, making them feel bad. And that's just not where I'm at when I teach and talk about white privilege. I think, again, it's about understanding it. And if you have access to maybe do some good things with it, and if you can gain even more access to really put yourself in a position where you can have some positive impact. We just live in a society. We live in a situation where there are going to be folks born in tax brackets that some of us will never see. And I understand that. And so what I'm saying to those folks is, are you doing good in a way that you've accumulated that equates the amount of excess that you have? That if you have an amount of excess, extra, you should be doing that amount of good in society. So that's what I'm trying to do and what I'm advising people to do.
Okay, we're in a period right now at this particular historical moment where the nation's attention is focused once again on the race question and police brutality. And we have seen, marching across the country, multiracial groups of protesters. We have seen statements coming from corporations, from billionaires, entertainers, universities, every organization. They're putting out some kind of statement. But we've seen statements before. We've seen protests before. Some of us to whom this is not a new issue and actually has been something we've been dealing with our entire lives are tired of just statements. So what tangible actions can you recommend that particular constituencies take now? Our last question was, looking at whether they should relinquish or whatever, but do you have suggestions when, people are going to come up and say, Dr. Moore, what can I do? What can I do at this moment? And so what can you, basing your whole life's work in this area, recommend for different types of people to consider doing and not just talking?
Yeah. I mean, you made an important statement and something I learned when we were playing ball back in Punta Gorda back in the day. You don't just talk about it, you got to be about it. And I think I'm with you. We've seen statements and testimonies. The question is, what do you do? And I think the thing I'm trying to do is understand I can't get Jeff Bezos to do what he says he's going to do. I can't even get Ben and Jerry from Ben and Jerry to follow their statement, although I thought it was a great statement. So right now, what I'm trying to do is in the circle of power we operate, start there. Really holding accountable, being in relationships with the people and the place where I live. And I think that's one piece of advice I give folks. Start at home. Look at yourself, right? To give an accountability and assessment to where you are and what you're doing, and stop talking about it. It's like better, or it's like getting out and doing more exercise. It's like any of those we tell kids or ask kids about obtaining, they have to write them down. They have to revisit them. They have to assess. And that's really where that 21 action plan came about. The thing I'm saying in a nutshell is don't talk about it, be about it. And I think that's where we are right now. And I don't know if I'm going to inspire the Green Bay Packers to do what they said they'd do in their statement. But I know I can work with people here in Green Bay and partner with them so that we can do some things. And I think that's one I'm looking at right now. And if I got a call from a mega pastor or a CEO from a corporation, I would go with, I like to play off on the Capital One campaign, what's in your wallet, right? Like whatever you possess as far as benefits, privileges are given back in the same amount. And what's the evidence of your back? Is it just or are there resources? Are there hirings? Are there hold accountable some people who may not be health organizations? I think being concrete, being specific, asking for evidence. I think we're in what I call the pessimistic phase. It's not about being optimistic and hoping things are better. It's about being optimistic and showing evidence of action. And I think that's what I'm asking people to do is to partner with people and ask for proof, evidence of action.
Okay. Through the Privilege Institute, are you or members of your organization personally available to go out across the country to do diversity trainings or to recommend people that do that? Because, you know, let's say we get some institution and they're like, okay, we're ready to do something. Can you come in? We can't do it ourselves.
Yeah. So I definitely do trainings. I will say to people is I'm what I call a CrossFit diversity trainer. So I'm not the you call when you want just one-on-one by y'all stuff. But if you go to the next level, that's what I do. That's what I really want to help and work with people to do individually as well as organizationally. In the Privilege Institute, we really help people with the programmatic side, understanding what are things that you've done in your organization, what is it that you're capable of doing, and how do we get there, starting maybe with Diversity 101, but eventually getting to white supremacy, white privilege, and other forms of oppression. The real challenge ahead of us right now is how do we go from Diversity 101 to 201? I feel like lots of people have gotten on board around that topic, that subject matter, but I think what the nation is saying today, what the nation is needing today, is work around white supremacy, white privilege, and other forms of oppression. And I think that's what I'm individually trying to do, as well as the Privilege Institute through the White Privilege Conference and other kinds of programs that we have put together, working with young people, as well as working with organizations.
Now, as I've said, I've been to 20 of your conferences, or 19 of them, and plus you've even done them abroad. You know, we're in this Zoom era. When is the next conference from the Privilege Institute, and when is the annual conference? I know it had to be canceled this year. If people want to follow up and come live, and I recommend it because thousands of people now come to these conferences. It's not just a couple hundred people, it's thousands of people. You even have a whole youth segment for younger people, high school age people. So what's the, where can people go if they, whether virtually or at some point in person, if they want to hear more on the topic or go to a whole several day event?
Yeah, for all three of those things there, you can find them with their name. Myself, EddieMoore.com, the Institute.com, and the WhitePrivilegeConference.com. The next conference, White Privilege 22, is scheduled for April 7 to 11 in Mesa, Arizona. And that'll be next year in 2021. This will be White Privilege 22. We are now in conversations with a couple other places in reference to some virtual conferencing in preparation for the big conference in 22. So you can find us on the website, because as you can imagine with COVID-19 and first phase, second phase, phase 1, phase 2, there's so many questions out there. So we're trying to pay attention to that and make sure we're being safe and keeping people safe. But the virtual world is something that we're looking at. And I would say to people, if you're interested, we got one cooking right now in Des Moines, Iowa, and I'll get you more information. But if you're interested in hosting something like this for your small group organization or for your communities, that's exactly what we do. And so you can find us all with our name, whether it's Facebook, whether it's our websites, or it's through Twitter or Instagram as well.
Okay, great. The website you mentioned, all of that, we're going to put it up on our website, uichr.org. People can go and look at this, where this webinar is on the site, and they will see, you know, your website as well. So I've come to the end of my formal questions for you, and I'm really delighted that we have just about a whole half hour for questions. And we're really delighted because, as you know, often you attend one of these events and there's 5 minutes for questions, and that can be frustrating. So I have a bunch of questions. Those who are listening, you can, submit a question that will come to me and Dr. Moore, and I can see from the number that I have, I won't be able to, ask Dr. Moore all of them, but we'll try to have him address a bunch of them, and I may combine some so we can get to what you really want to know. So the first question that I have, can you address white fragility? What's that about? And how does that relate to white?
Yeah, white fragility. Yeah, great question. Great question. White fragility terminology developed by Robin DiAngelo, who's been a big supporter of the conference. Fragility really is not a weak person. It doesn't indicate that you're weaker. Fragility actually talks about your ability to have tough conversations around race, around racism, around white supremacy. If you've not had a lot of experience with that and you get challenged or you get asked a question about it, because you don't have a foundation, you may be standing on fragile ground, so to speak. And a lot of times that happens around race, and many times, according to Robin's research, it's happened with people, especially white women. So that's where that terminology comes from, white fragility. And her book, not Waking Up White Fragility, by that title, really good one. Waking Up Right is another one by Debbie Irving. I think it's been another book I'd recommend for folks who want to understand more how to process themselves out of that white fragility framework. And the way it connects with white supremacy is that's one of the toughest topics. I mean, just try it. Practice after your webinar. Go somewhere. Say to people, hey, I just listened in to Dr. Moore. We were talking about white supremacy. Watch how many elbow bumps you get. I mean, it's a tough conversation. And so if people had that, they can be fragile and they can lash out, or they can, turn and get angry. So you got to be also attentive to the kind of reactions you can get from that. So in a nutshell, that's white fragility and its connection to white supremacy.
Okay, I have a person, a white person who it couldn't figure out what to do. And she was in a store trying to buy a cell phone. The person selling the phones was ignoring all of the Black people who were waiting. And she pointed that out. She said, look, you're overlooking people. And that worker still refused to help the Black people. And, she didn't know what to do. Should she have just left the store and refused to give that business any money? What else could she have done specifically in that kind of circumstance?
Well, let me start end of this sentence by saying there will be other moments. So be ready, okay? Learn from this and the fact that you weren't sure, and be ready for the next moment. Now, if we rewind, I would say get the names of the folks saying, hey, y'all upset about this? Are y'all seeing this? And maybe collectively write a letter or email. We are now seeing people lose their job. Racism. There is a different level of accountability that organizations are talking about when it comes to racism. So that may be something. Now, I like to offer a little grace and love when working with people around these issues. So maybe before initiating the fire procedure, have a conversation to give them an opportunity. Because sometimes I learned this, and people just don't know. Just not had the experience. So I'm okay with some grace, saying, hey, you noticing this? Because I'm noticing this. If nothing responds positive, go to the people saying, hey, maybe we should do something. We shouldn't come back here. Maybe we should post something on social media about our experience. Maybe we should tell the owner if that's not the owner involved. And lastly, be ready, because there'll be more.
Okay, here's a question about terminology. What is the most accepted respectful term? Black, African American, people of color?
Yeah,
What
a
do
great
you
question.
prefer?
Yeah, great question. I would say, let me start with the things you shouldn't say. All right. So, you know, there are a couple words you shouldn't use when you talk to Black folks, right? Great. So, first, know what you shouldn't say. You'd be surprised living in the Midwest, folks still referring to Black people as colored people. All right. There are some terms you cannot use. Know those terms. Secondly, the language is changing. Now people are saying Black, Indigenous, people of color, BIPOC. Okay, so know that there's some evolution going on with the language and be up to date. Lastly, if you screw up, just say, I'm sorry. I didn't know. It's okay to make mistakes around diversity. Some of us are encountering some of the things for the first time we've never encountered before. And that's going to happen more and more as our nation continues to get increasingly more diverse. It's okay to screw up around diversity. Say, I'm sorry. What can I do? And move forward. And if that person can't offer some love and grace, then you probably don't need to be in collaboration with those folks. That's my advice there. Great question.
Another one, what about other races? Is there a hierarchy of privilege? You know, we have Asians, we have Latinx people, Indigenous people, Arab people, Jewish people. We have so many different groups in the country, just using the US, that have had different experiences with discrimination. And so is there some hierarchy that we could look at, or should we look at it intersectionally, or how to proceed with that?
Yeah, now I do know that there's some global exporting of white supremacy, white multicultural dominance that continues to impact even folks in China, as well as other parts of the world, from New Zealand to Australia, to Jamaica, so on and so forth, and Africa as well. So I think the key is understanding white supremacy, white multicultural dominance, its design and its impact. Because what happens is once you understand that, then you can see that there are impacts around gender, impacts around skin color, impacts on income, around access and ability. And that, I argue, that understanding and that comprehensive knowledge about those different impacts can be applied in Russia, in Brazil, in Portland. So absolutely, there's some applications and impact of white supremacy, white multicultural dominance globally. My specialty is primarily here in the States, although I've experienced some work with some folks on a global scale, even bringing the conference to a global place. And white supremacy, it's everywhere. It's impact. It's a global product that's been exported for hundreds of years. And the way I see it is those different components, and then you can see skin color play out even in India. Income disparities, even in Korea. And so those are the ways in which I understand it, and then look at how it impacts and is applied in different places, even across the globe.
Mm-hmm. What are the best ways of progressing forward in a more equitable, caring, and fair way?
Yeah. This is one porcupine that may be hard for the audience to hug, to embrace, that white supremacy, white multicultural dominance may outlive us all. And I'm okay with that. I mean, it's had hundreds of years of success, so it may have a few more 100 years of success ahead of it before it completely vanishes. I don't even know if it'll vanish from the planet. And I think that that's okay, knowing that this white supremacy, white multicultural dominance will be here forever. So the key is, how do you take care of yourself if you're going to be working to push against this, to understand this, to challenge it? So self-care is important. You got to also understand, you know, the ways in which you are a benefactor and then you are being oppressed as well. And so I think that the thing that I've had to struggle with the most is coming to grips with the fact that I don't know if I'll ever see the end results of my work in a positive way. And I'm okay with that now. And so what I'm trying to do now is, I'm not sure I'm going to get rid of white supremacy, but I'm going to have as much fun and be as creative and hardworking and healthy as possible as I fight it to my dying day.
Okay, suppose you're a white person and you're at a family gathering. It's July 4th, it's Thanksgiving, it's somebody's graduation or wedding. And you have some family members who they don't believe there's any white privilege. They're not going to come to a lecture by Dr. Eddie Moore or Dean Adrian Wing. What would be the best way succinctly to try to convince someone like that? Could be somebody in your very family, to convince them that there is a thing called white privilege, no matter how they're living or anything.
Yeah. So first, one thing I've learned, and I say to people often in my presentations, there's some pancakes you'll never flip over. Okay. Sometimes the toughest work you have to do is with the people you love the most. And one thing I've learned working with some of the folks I love the most is nothing I say may work. And I'm okay with that, right? Some pancakes you'll never flip over. The key is, what is the message you're giving to the young people around? Too often, people say nothing, and that's the message to young people. So what I'm saying to you, don't say it in an effort to change somebody. Say it in an effort to be a role model for the young people. I always say to people, the best friend that hate has, in this case, white supremacy, is silence. The worst thing you can do is say nothing. And I would say with family, I mean, if people are looking at 8 minutes and 46 seconds, a black man dying on TV at the hands of a white police officer, that to me looked like there was no real remorse being showed there. And they still have problems understanding that there's white privilege based on when they were arrested, who got bail, that they're, the cops, if they can't see it after where we are now, then, I mean, don't spend your most time with the most resistant. Be a role model. Let it go in reference to trying to convince them, and make sure you take care of yourself, build your knowledge, because there are young people watching you. And I think that's where I want to spend my energy, is working with the people who want to learn. We don't have to agree on everything, but at least they're willing to hear me out, and vice versa.
I know I often have given people Professor Peggy McIntosh's very small article, The Knapsack of Privilege. And if they're willing to read, but if they're not, you can kind of summarize it and talk about, well, I can go into a store, nobody's looking at me. I can turn on the TV and there are people that look at me. So you can kind of mention some of these things at Thanksgiving, if you dare, and to point out things that people may have never thought of. Which brings me to the next question. Somebody says, where can they go if they want to learn more about the history and origin of systematic racism? Is there any particular book that you recommend for people to look at? Obviously, this is a whole giant specialty.
Yeah. And we'll send to folks who are interested a little PowerPoint that I created that has some of those resources. I got a small stack here beside me of some of my favorite books that I've read and that I'm reading. I think Professor Ibram Kendi X has a recent book about Stamp from the Beginning. I think it's been one of the more recent historical portrayals for folks. But I think that that's the beauty of where we are today, is there are more books than I can name in even the 30 minutes that we have left, or 10 minutes of questions, which is a good sign. I mean, 10 years ago, 20 years ago, when I got the conference started, that just wasn't the case. And so I think that there are now, as you mentioned, short pieces. There are things you can listen to. There are things that you can watch. And so I'm happy to be a resource in that way. My website, the Privilege Institute, that's something that we do. We have and put together some great resources on a handout. My favorite book for me, though, the best book I've read that's taught me to teach and learn, and a mentor of mine was Joe Fagan. And he wrote the book, The White Racial Frame. And it was one of the books that helped me to take the language of white supremacy and put it together as a teaching tool. Because in some places you can't say white supremacy, okay? So you gotta design a curriculum that can be delivered that may be absent of the actual language because people may not be ready to consume it. Joe Fagan's The White Racial Frame has helped me tremendously. Dr. Joy DeGruy, post-traumatic slave syndrome, has helped me from a person of color standpoint, talking about white supremacy, learning how to take care of myself as well. And so there's a great teaching and learning tool, and then for me, a great self-care tool.
What I was very interested in, if you Google New York Times bestsellers, it's amazing. Right now, I mean, almost all of the top 20 bestsellers are books to do with race. And people are requesting them, right? Making them bestsellers for the first time or bestsellers again. And you know, if depending what kind of reader you are, just looking at these sources, and it can be hard to get the books because they, you know, they have to reprint many of them for the volume. So, okay, here's another book question. Here's an educator.
Just quickly to add to that quickly to book reading, there's been a lot of that over a lot of years. That's why we tried to put this action plan together, because you have to do more than read the book. Book plus action. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, but that's perfect because you can read 20 books and become knowledgeable, but we need your action plan or something like it, or institutions need to work on action plans with the help of knowledgeable people. So here's another question that deals with a book. This person is an educator of teachers at Iowa State. And is there something you can recommend for teachers? I think you have something right on point. That is an ideal book for teachers anywhere in the country who want some help.
Yeah. And you know, my publisher, Corwin Press, has taken on some real initiative to produce what they're calling courageous publications. And so from Zaretta Hammond to Glenn Singleton, there's been some really great books around this subject matter for educators, and many, many more. Paul Gorski does some great work as well. One of the books I'm most proud of is our collective effort of the Guide for White Women Who Teach Black Boys. And we've been really excited about the results of that book because it was designed to be in the hands of educators, white women teachers specifically, but even parents and all educators or people working with Black boys, to really assist them in doing a better job than what we've done the last 25 years. And actually right now, we're working on the companion book to that called Teaching Beautiful, Brilliant Black Girls. And that'll be out this January. So Corwin Press as well. So those are two of the books that I've been a part of. But like the book talk we just mentioned earlier around just the general topic of white supremacy, there's a plethora of books out there, a lot different than 10, 20 years ago. The same is true about educator books from Bettina Love, Chris Emden. There's some really great publications that have come out in the last 5 years even that really speak to teachers working with kids and have conversation language about white supremacy, white privilege, and other forms of oppression.
There's a lot of questions where people are interested in you coming to their community. So obviously earlier you were saying, go to your website, they can get in contact, figuring out if you guys can, give them assistance, etc. So we don't have much time left, and here's, I have 80 questions that have come in. So I'm only just gonna pick a few to close. What do you view as the special responsibility of healthcare organizations to address these issues now in the age of the coronavirus?
Yeah, I think we could literally say people's lives are depending on it. And healthcare is one of those fields, when you talk about white supremacy, white male cultural dominance, that often hasn't received a lot of scrutiny. A lot of work I've been doing, a lot of work that I've been asked to do has been in education. But when you look at the healthcare field, particularly medicine, it has been one of the biggest contributions to destruction of people of color, particularly Black folks, but people of color in general in this great nation, in the name of white supremacy. And so I really think that medical schools, nursing schools, I think we need to be embedding classes into those trainings around this subject matter, as well as credentialing. Just like CPR or other kinds of professional accreditation, it should involve some subject matter associated with this topic. It's one of the whitest fields out there. And it's not because these people are smarter, right? So we've had some real effort put forth in medicine to create the kind of disparities we have in reference to who the doctors are and what the research and all of that, the medication and all of that, the analysis and all of that says about and to different groups of people. And if you didn't believe me last year, if anything has shown that, it's COVID-19, the pandemic. And I want to just say what I said to start. If they don't get on board, people's lives will be lost.
You specialize, the earlier question about K through 12 and educators you mentioned, is there anything special you would like to mention about assisting tertiary level of education, you know, universities, professional schools, etc.?
Yeah, well, I'm like a DJ at a wedding. I could play something for your 5-year-old or your 76-year-old board of directors head. So I'm definitely open to work with, skilled to work with, experienced to work with, credentialed to work with any of those groups. The key thing for me is I'm not interested in diversity 101. And what we now know, I believe, from all of this study and knowledge around this, it takes some time, it takes resources. The thing I'll tell you, those of you in the audience thinking about bringing me or my team to work with you, our model has always been available, affordable, and negotiable. And so I'm willing to work with folks who want to do the work. But I think we have to begin to look at that work differently, because the research is clear. If you're doing superficial diversity for an hour, 2 hours even, it's just not working. And what we're talking about now, I think, and the need to do now, I think, is expose, examine, change, challenge white supremacy, white cultural dominance. And that takes some real work. And so that's the kind of work I want to do with folks, and really, whether it's over a year or 2 years or, you know, whatever but we'll work with them. But the key is they got to be invested in doing the work, as opposed to these old models of keynote speaker, Martin Luther King Day, let's make things better. It's just not been working. I think, I'm not happy about COVID-19. I've been inside more than I've been inside since I was a baby boy, right? Like, I'm not happy, but I think it's helped us, I hope, to shine some light on where we really are, what we've really been doing. Are we really doing better? And if we want to do better, if we want to take a serious look at what's been going on, I mean, the research is clear. And so what I'm doing coming out of COVID-19, coming out of the pandemic, is I'm trying to be different than when I started, when the pandemic started. And that's the energy and that's the effort I want to work with people around is let's do something substantive, concrete, and let's not let money be the obstacle. Let's find some creative, some innovative ways to make it happen. And that's where I'm at right now.
One last question before we close. Do you think racism is worse now than it has been, better, the same? Where are we?
Yeah. I think I don't know how true this quote is, so I'm not going to attach any name to it. But I heard someone say it's not that racism is worse, it's just that now we can see it better because of social media, especially. And so what I do believe is from the efforts that are coming from particularly white folks, that what I feel they're saying is I haven't been doing enough. I can do better. I can do more. And I think that that's not just white folks. I think we're all having some gut check around that. And so I think that personally, I believe that we haven't made the kind of progress that we should make with all the resources that we possess. We're definitely underachieving based on all the things we have here in this great nation. I will say that. And I think part of that is we've only been doing the most comfortable thing, the little things that has helped us to kind of put a Band-Aid here and there. And so I think this is the opportunity, and I'm excited. I'm excited about this time and excited to be working with people during this time who are saying, what can we literally do for the next 25 years if we start with white supremacy, if we start with the high level examination? And I don't know, I can't foresee what that's gonna look like in 25 years, but I'd really like to spend some time and some energy there. And that's what I'm looking forward to. And if we answer this question 25 years from now, and it's the same thing, I'd at least like to say, well, we sure tried doing some white supremacy work as opposed to feeling like we've tried to end racism by doing diversity work.
Well, thank you very much, Dr. Moore. Our time is up. If our audience, if you didn't see the whole webinar, or if you have friends and family that are out there that you want to look at, this webinar, it's on our website. We hope that people will attend next week and attend our other events. Thank you very much, everyone. Have a good rest of your day.